Excellent. So what I'd like to um, explore this morning is the, um, say, impact or place of attachment work and sense of self to this overall path of waking up. And to start with, one thing or one frame we could look at our experience in today is how we are consistently on some, say, spectrum of the polarity of building the self up in some um, uh, pole of grandiosity, or knocking ourselves down in some sort of pole of self defeat. So you could see this from in kind of very gross ways. In other words, um, the self improvement project, or now I'm really getting somewhere, or a competitiveness with um, others in our own fantasy that we're whatever more mature or a better practitioner or something like that, to even very subtle voices when the whole system of meditation seems to be working and things go quiet. There's maybe an ongoing background comparison of this moment is quieter than the last moment, so something is better about that experience. So the selfing project in that pole is a building up. On the other hand, there's the beating ourselves up. There's the I'll never get anywhere. This isn't working. I thought I had it and now I lost it. Or this moment isn't as clear, open, liberated as the last, if we're talking on a more subtle level of the this pole. So this goes on and on and on in many ways, and it's one frame. We could just call that whole thing ego. It's this continual, incessant selfing that we tend to think we need to get rid of in order to wake up, or that waking up will somehow this whole thing will be transcended and will be in some other reality, that this isn't happening, or at least that we're not, for the most part, going to be doing that anymore. And the trouble with the whole view of the idea of enlightenment being some place that we're training to go towards is that we don't know what enlightenment is. And so we tend to take that concept and roll it into the up and down of the grandiosity and the self collapse, say, that we're always doing. And so this is maybe, it might be better to admit to ourselves that what we'd actually like is just to feel better. We would actually just like to feel a little bit more peaceful in our own skin, and to experience something different than this up and down and getting dragged around through our lives, in this constant chatter and evaluation. So for today, we might just start with an idea. Instead of, I need to get somewhere to another reality because I've been taught, I need to witness or I need to create a state change in order to wake up. That actually, while that may be somewhat true, it might be better to just take on a philosophy that I actually would just like to be a little bit more liberated, a little bit more free from the chatter, but within this life, a simple sense of okayness. So what I want to suggest is that we call the grandiosity and putting down thing, the whole thing, just call that narcissism. In other words, not a narcissistic character structure or what we, think of as the narcissist who is so grand and kind of fragile in some way, but that we all have this narcissistic sense of holding on to this pattern of selfing. And it's different for each of us, but it's the same sort of structure. Some of us might think we lean more towards the grandiosity side, but the more we lean towards the grandiosity side, we know that the self kind of collapse or the yoke, that we actually are, is equally strong. And some of us may lean towards the yoke and just be always more in the collapsing side, in the self-shaming side. But it doesn't really matter. It's the same kind of thing. And the trick is, within that frame, it may be very hard to let in okayness. Because from the grandiose point of view, okayness means I'm not enough. And from a collapsed point of view, the okayness means I'll never get there, or I don't deserve it, or I don't even know what that feels like, or whatever. So then we take up this path with a philosophy of no self. And it's sort of a mess, because we're trying to get rid of this self frame while not really knowing what a transcendent no self could look like. And it ends up being an aggressive maneuver to try and change our experience. So what I want to suggest as a model or a evidence of spiritual growth is that we can experience pleasure without the narcissistic grasping to make ourselves more grandiose or the collapse. That actually experiencing pleasure sensorially, in other words, tasting, touching, smelling, feeling, hearing, thinking, and emoting, that whole sixth consciousness model, our entire sensory experience, that noticing pleasure in kind of ordinary circumstances might be a possible way to go, rather than this massive self-improvement, self-defeating project. The Daniel P. Brown ideal parents visualization is in some way getting down to this point. And whatever your experience with that meditation, including I don't understand it or it's not working for me, is likely in that frame of narcissism. It's like, I'm not getting out of it what I want, or I don't know how to do this, or I can't even think of what an ideal parent would be because my parenting was so horrible. All of that is the meditation working. You can't really lose on this one, because if you're unable to create a visualization of the ideal thing that you would need at any given moment and receive that, say, we call it medicine, so that you just feel okay. Not great, not blissful, not the Buddha, but just simply okay as you are. Then what's coming up is the self aggression, the not good enough, or the I'm better than this, I've already done this work. Whatever the tape is, that's youing. So the idea is that if we, for example, feel like that meditation isn't working, or are actually feeling rageful at our parents or hard on ourselves because we can't get this, we can't take anything in this meditation. The idea then would be to, instead of um, continue on the self-improvement project or the avoidance of the self-improvement project, wherever you find yourself, it might be healthier to just simply have a look at yourself when you cannot experience anything of pleasure without narcissism and just say, wow, looks hard in there, period. We don't have to go on a self-compassion project. It's like, it just looks hard in there. That's a genuine movement towards suffering. Wow, tough. Wow, you can't receive any care right now for yourself? That's pretty fucked up. Okay, got it. And then can we create an ideal parent towards that part that can't even get this right? This basic, simple notion that I might be just as worthy as anybody else to experience life as okay, just all right. You know, the fact that I can't do that hurts. And so rather than running away from the hurt by creating the grandiosity or collapsing, which is also running away from the hurt, by the way, wallowing in the hurt, it just looks hard in there. And just slowly over time, a trickle of allowing ourselves to receive some kind of medicine for this pain we're in. I've noticed that when the attachment needs are met in a moment to moment experience, in other words, and when I mean met, it's that we feel okay. We feel what safety is like. That may initially feel like a whole lot of relief when we realize maybe we've never felt safe. But after that initial experience of relief, it's more like we don't just don't feel unsafe, which is just okay. It's not some, you know, massive bliss project. But as we slowly take that in and realize we're attuning to our own experience, we are making ourselves safe by feeling what safety feels like. We are regulating our own emotions and being actually reasonably kind to ourselves when we're upset. Hey, looks hard in there. That when we're doing that over and over again, and the basic ego needs at the attachment level are satisfied to some degree, we can let go. We don't have to hold on to that anymore because there's not this self-doubting project going on all the time. So what I want to suggest today, which may sound like the opposite of what I just said, but sit harder than you did the last time. Do more. And see if you could do that in the spirit I'm talking about. It's like the idea is we can bring up more and tolerate more, which gives us a sense of self, actually, that becomes a little bit more confident. You know, there's that kind of doing more than we thought we could, but not from the point of grandiosity, just a sense of, wow, okay, I did better, that's good. And more, say, purification begins to happen, which feels worse, but that gives us more opportunity to work with ourselves from a place of being okay rather than a place of needing it to be different. So watch, you know, when, like last time I gave the instruction, take care of yourself. That doesn't mean the ego actually knows or has any intelligence about what that means. Because it could look like, well, you know, last sit hurt a little bit, so maybe I'll lay down for this one or whatever. And that may or may not be true. It may be that we just don't know because we're in that loop. And so the point isn't to, you know, this is why I suspect Zen teachings more geared towards insight and breaking through first and compassion later. Because when we talk about compassion and lay it on the grandiosity collapse model, we start to not only just take care of ourselves to be okay, we start to tell ourselves a story that we are victims in some way. So I'd like to try just a 5-minute guided meditation to give a couple of concrete tools about how you might work with yourself today. So if you can just find a posture that could be relaxed, doesn't need to be super upright, but just relaxed, attentive. Let go of any tension in the body, let it go down through the sit bones, soften the eyes, and open the visual field. So at this point, you know exactly how to open the visual field. It takes about 1 second, and it changes everything. Now, while keeping the visual field open, bring to mind what Daniel Brown has pointed to in the Ideal Parents, that sense that you've always had of a need that wasn't met as a child. These are often qualities such as loneliness, collapse, shame, frustration. Just see if you can zero in on something. And if that doesn't work, just find any contraction that you can feel in your body. And then notice your relationship to that contraction, what you're doing with it. Is the visual field still open? And do you notice that it's likely what you call your awareness becomes a narrower frame? In other words, when what we perceive as a contraction occurs in the body or in the thinking, whatever, that we tend to narrow onto it in some way. It's like a threat, or there's some vigilance, or there's a tightening down of the experience. And that generally we experience awareness as being full of negative sensorial experience. If we are in the frame of narcissism, we do our thing, which is try to strategize how to get rid of it because it's rubbing up against our I was doing better story. Or we just feel so terrible about ourselves that we'd rather go away. Or we just ignore the whole experience in some way. But if you get a sense of that narrower frame, so what I'd like to try now is stay with the contraction, but fully open the visual field again, like open the frame and open space. Get a sense of your body being more spacious than the actual contraction in the body. And then invite the contraction to completely fill the space. Let it fill all the space you can create. And notice what happens. It may feel like the contraction is increasing in a sense because it starts to move. You're just allowing it to have all the space. There may be like a little blip of fear, but then it starts to move or expand out. This is what purification feels like. It doesn't mean there's no contraction. It means that there's flow. We were fixed or frozen on something, and now there's flow. So the contraction may still be there, and that's perfect, but we're just giving it full breadth. So that's technique 1 for the day. And here's technique 2. Notice that even in the contraction, perhaps 90% of your experience is neutral or positive. So it's not like running away from the contraction, but just noticing that in the field of sensory experience, the visual field, the somatic field, the auditory field, you're not noticing 90% of what's going on when you feel something negative. Just notice most of your visual field is neutral. Most of your auditory field neutral. Tasting and nose are probably 100% neutral unless you're eating or smelling something. And notice what happens to the contraction then. That's technique 2. Technique 3, the most advanced, is to notice if there's anything positive in the contraction itself. So we're still keeping the field open and letting the contraction move or fill up the space entirely. But to notice if actually in what you call a contraction, there might be something 5% even positive, that it's just tingling, for example, or it's just silver, for example. or it feels good that it's moving, for example. And receive that something feels good. As soon as we let that be received, say on a visceral level, we're being okay with ourselves. Not blissful, not amazing, not building anything special, just okay. Okay, and then we can come back to the room. So that'll be it for this morning. Just the bottom line is see if you can notice anything positive throughout the day that isn't building on this self structure, that it's very direct. It has to be here in the present moment, experienced sensorily, but it doesn't have to then create any sort of idea or future karmic wave where if you build up on how good that was, you know for sure what's coming after that. You know for sure it's coming to the other side at some point. Even spiritual attainment and getting it, it's all in that realm. We just want to feel okay. So notice what's okay. Just notice what is okay in your sensory experience. You don't have to cultivate that. Okay. Well, I think we have a short break now, and we'll see you back on the cushion.